So, the Mabinogion, a Welsh epic covering oral tradition of medieval Wales but set far earlier in some cases. Now, it's technically made up of 11 different stories in the first manuscript it was recorded in full in, but the main meat of it is in play in 4 of them, the so-called 4 branches. Now, since it was overly sarcastic productions that introduced me to the Mabinogion, I thought I'd pay them homage, as it were, and make this video about it. This was originally intended to be like 2 minutes long and part of a class presentation, but it's impossible to properly summarize 120-ish pages in just that long, so I made this instead. Let's speedrun. Branch 1. Pwyll Penifig Dyfed. One day, Pwyll, the Prince of Dyfed in what is now southern Wales, set out in the forest upon his horse. He came across a stag being hunted by suspiciously magical-looking dogs and thought it would be a good idea to drive them away and take the stag for himself. Just then, a rider rode up on a horse. He calls Pwyll rude and eventually introduces himself as Aran, a king of Annwn, or any of these other spellings. In any case, the other world. Pwyll and Aran switch places. Pwyll spends a year in the other world, pointedly not sleeping with Aran's wife, before he strikes down and humiliates Aran's rival king, Havgan. When he comes back to his kingdom, he explains everything to his people. Later, Pwyll spots a rider on a horse clad in a golden cloak. He sends a bunch of his riders after her but can't catch up until he calls out in desperation and she stops. Turns out it's actually Rhiannon, the daughter of Heveth Hen, Lord of Annwn, Mor Annwn. She wants Pwyll to marry her because she loves him despite never having met her. They get married, and at the feast, someone shows up. It's Gwal ap Clwyd, the man Rhiannon's father wanted her to marry. Pwyll messes up. Gwal takes Rhiannon and a year later has a wedding feast. A man dressed in rags shows up. Surprise, it's Pwyll. He puts Gwal in a bag, and then he and his army beat up the bag, inventing a game called Badger in the Bag, apparently. 3 years later, Pwyll and Rhiannon have a child at the urging of their nobles. The women who are supposed to watch over the baby do a really bad job of it. Bad enough that they decide to murder a bunch of puppies to make it look like Rhiannon killed the baby. I'm not showing that. Anyways, neither Rhiannon nor Pwyll believe it, but Rhiannon is still forced to sit next to a mounting block, steps for mounting horses, for a year and tell her story. Now, in a kingdom called Gwentis Coed, apparently they have men and women there, King Ternan was having trouble keeping track of his horse's children. Turns out it's a monster stealing them, so he fights it off, then he hears a scream from his door and opens it to find a baby. Ternan and his wife raised the golden-haired boy as a son named Guriwash Iron. 4 years in, he looked twice his age and quite a bit like Pwyll. So they take him back to Pwyll, where a random guy, Pendaran Dyfed, renames Guri to Pryderi after saying essentially that Guriwash Iron is a bad name, which, to be fair, it is. And then Pwyll dies years later, marking the end of Branch 1. Branch 2, Branwen Clear. The king of Britain is a guy named Bendigeidfran, or Bran the Blessed, the son of Llyr. He's sitting on the beach with his relatives when a bunch of Irish ships show up. Turns out Matholwch, the king of Ireland, wants to marry Bendigeidfran's sister Branwen. Now, Branwen's supposedly the most beautiful woman in Britain, so there's that. Branwen and Matholwch go to Aberfraw to bang, not showing that either, but Evnishan, one of Bendigeidfran's half-brothers, doesn't like that his half-sister was promised to Matholwch, so he massacres a bunch of horses. Matholwch takes it as an insult, so starts to leave, which Bendigeidfran doesn't like, so he sends his brother Manawydan and 2 other noblemen, Hevaid Hir and Uneglu Ysgwyth, to go fetch Matholwch, which works, and they bring him back. Bendigeidfran gives Matholwch treasure, which doesn't satisfy him, so he adds on a cauldron that can resurrect people as well, which he seems to like. Matholwch and Branwen head back to Ireland. However, 2 years later, the nobles still don't like that someone slaughtered a bunch of Matholwch's horses, so they tell him to embargo Wales. They also make Branwen do all the cooking and get punched every day. This carries on for 3 years before Branwen sends the Starling to go deliver a letter to a brother, Bendigeidfran. Bendigeidfran levies the troops and heads to Ireland, leaving behind 7 men to rule over Britain/Wales. One of them is Pendaran Dyfed as a child, which is odd given he's Pryderi's namer and foster father in the first branch, who, as we'll see, is currently with Bendigeidfran in Ireland going to war. Anyways, on the way there, some swineherds mistake the ships for a forest, and apparently Bendigeidfran for a mountain, with Branwen saying later that he's too big to fit in a ship. Like big enough his eyes appear as lakes. So anyway, Matholwch's forces retreat across the river Liffey, which the Welsh forces can't cross, so Bendigeidfran, being really big, lays down across the river. He and his men are met on the other side of the river by some of Matholwch's messengers. After some negotiation, the men build Bendigeidfran a giant house. Now, secretly, a bunch of soldiers hide in bags scattered all around the house, but Evnishan discovers the ruse and kills all of them by squeezing their heads. Womp womp. The men of Wales and Ireland make peace, but Evnishan throws Branwen's son into the fire, then destroys the cauldron of rebirth. There's uproar about this, and only 7 Welshmen make it out alive, including Pryderi, Manawydan, and the poet Taliesin. Manawydan gets stabbed through the foot by a poisoned spear and tells the men to cut off his head and bury it in Britain facing France. There's some wrap-up involving a coup in Britain, but essentially that's the end of Branch 2. Branch 3. Manawydan fab Pwyll. Manawydan and Pryderi are chatting, and Manawydan is sad because he doesn't have a place to stay. His cousin committed the aforementioned coup and now rules over Britain, and Manawydan doesn't want to stay with him. So Pryderi offers to give him Dyfed and offers him Rhiannon's hand in marriage, which he accepts. So they go to Dyfed, and Rhiannon and Manawydan get along swimmingly. They agree to get married and do something I'm again not going to show. They go to the hill where Pwyll once saw Rhiannon, and suddenly mist descends, concealing everyone from the 4 of them: Pryderi, Manawydan, Rhiannon, and Pryderi's wife Kigva. Turns out no one's in Dyfed anymore, so they travel around England for a bit, doing different trades. Pryderi keeps wanting to kill everyone who slights them, but Manawydan stops him each time. They all go back to Dyfed, where Pryderi finds a fort and goes inside, where he picks up a bowl and gets completely frozen. And then Rhiannon comes in and gets stuck too. And then the fort disappears. Kigva and Manawydan go back to England and then immediately come back to Dyfed. Manawydan keeps raising wheat and it keeps getting stolen over and over again. Turns out it's by an army of mice. Manawydan takes the single mouse he caught and goes to sacrifice it on the hill where this all started when he sees a cleric walking up the hill. The cleric tries to get him not to kill the mouse, but he refuses the offers. Then a priest comes up the hill and the same thing happens. Then a bishop. Manawydan catches on and asks for the release of Pryderi and Rhiannon in exchange for the life of the mouse and for the curse over Dyfed to be lifted. Turns out the bishop is a man named Llwyd, son of Kilcoed, a friend of Gwal ap Clwyd, and this whole thing has been a revenge plot for the stunt Pwyll and shoving Gwal in a bag. He wants the mouse because it's his wife. It's a whole thing. Pryderi and Rhiannon shows up and Manawydan hands over the mouse. End of the 3rd branch. Branch 4. Math fab Mathonwy. We learn of this guy, Math fab Mathonwy, who is under some sort of curse that he must rest his feet in the lap of a virgin unless he is at war. We're going to mostly ignore that visuals-wise because I don't want to depict it. Anyway, so Math can't leave his castle, but his nephews Gilvaethwy and Gwydion do it for him. One problem, Gilvaethwy is in love with Gawain, Math's appointed footrest virgin. Ew. So Gwydion concocts a plan. Pryderi, he's in this one too, has come into possession of strange animals that no one's ever seen. It's pigs. The animal is pigs. Gwydion tells Math about the pigs and gets leave to go south. He disguises himself as a poet and tells a story to Pryderi, which he likes. Gwydion asks for the pigs in return for his excellent story, which Pryderi refuses, but only because he has a contract to keep them until they've doubled. Gwydion leaves and conjures up 12 war horses and dogs outfitted in gold, as well as 12 golden shields. He brings them back to Pryderi, who takes them. Gwydion leaves, and Pryderi discovers everything was fake the next day and calls for war. Math goes to war with Pryderi, and Gwydion ends up killing Pryderi. Gawain comes to Math and reveals that Gilvaethwy used the opportunity to assault her. And for this, Math turns Gwydion and Gilvaethwy into deer for a year, and then boars for a year, and then wolves for a year. Each year the animals have children together, don't think about it, it's bad, and they're named Heidhun, Heithun, and Blaithun. Math decides Gwydion and Gilvaethwy have had enough punishment and turns them back into men. Math needs to find a new virgin for his curse, and Gwydion suggests his sister, Aranrod, who has baby-like immediately, who Math names Dylan. He's not important, forget him. However, she also gives birth to a blob-like entity, which Gwydion puts in a chest at the foot of his bed. One day, Gwydion awakes to find a fully grown baby where he had put the blob and raises him as his own. He brings the boy to Aranrod when the boy is 4 but looks 8 because he's special. He accuses Aranrod of this being her baby, saying he has no name. Aranrod refuses to name him and then says Gwydion can't name him. Gwydion very convolutedly does name him by tricking Aranrod into naming him Llwyd Giffis, the fair-handed one. Gwydion raises Llw to adulthood, though due to another curse by Aranrod, he can't give Llw weapons, which he wants. Gwydion disguises Llw and himself as travelers, tricking Aranrod into giving them weapons. Gwydion and Math then conjure up a wife named Blodeuwedd for Llw out of flowers. Math gives Llw the cantref, think a county or duchy of Dynoding. While Llw is out, Blodeuwedd falls in love with a man named Gronw Pebr, and then conspires to kill Llw. It's super convoluted, involving a spear made only on Sundays, a goat, and a tub. She asks if Llw would like to take a bath directly after he tells her that he needs to be in a bathtub to die, which he doesn't have a problem with for some reason. And he does take a bath, and surprise, it's a trap. Llw gets stabbed and turned into an eagle. Gwydion eventually turns him back into a human, but he's sickly now, and then he recovers in literally one sentence. Llw and Gwydion go to get revenge and turn Blodeuwedd into an owl. Sooooo kills Gronu by throwing a spear through a stone and gets his land back. And that's the end of the 4 branches of the Mabinogion. Hope you enjoyed, and please watch my play, Snowdin Lilies. It's based on the 4th and 1st branches of the Mabinogion and is available right here on this YouTube channel. Bye!